As the trade dispute between China and the US shows no immediate signs of abating, does China hold the trump card? As the world's largest importer of soybeans, how strong a hand does China actually have? The Trump administration has also been declaring trade wars with many of its traditional allies. Is this simply geopolitical suicide, or is there a hidden agenda that is going over our heads? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. In an interview with CNBC that aired Friday morning, President Trump renewed his threat to ultimately slap tariffs on a total of over $500 billion of imports from China, roughly equal to all the goods China ships annually to the US. The president has already imposed tariffs on $34 billion in Chinese goods, and Beijing has retaliated with tariffs on an equal amount of American exports. The White House has also itemized $200 billion of additional Chinese imports that is said may be subject to tariffs. But in the event of an actual global trade war, China may have the best tool for retaliation in the agricultural market, soybeans. According to the US Soybean Export Council, or USSEC, as the largest importer of US soybeans and home to 1.3 billion soy consumers, China imported 36 million metric tons of soybeans from the United States for the 12 months ending August 2017. Also, 8 of the top soybean producing states in the United States voted for Trump to be president in 2016. So how will the ongoing soybean war cast its influence on the U.S. politics, and how will international market fluctuate? Joining me for the discussion from Taipei is Burke, Regional Director of North Asia for the U.S. Soybean Export Council, and here in the Beijing studio, Professor Gong at the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Mr. Burke, let me go to you first. Now, in response to an announcement regarding U.S.'s tariffs on Chinese imports, the USSEC, the American Soybean Association, or ASA, and the United Soybean Board, or USB, released a statement saying the ongoing trade war has led to a drop of market prices, adding additional export market uncertainty. So nobody is a winner today. Could you elaborate on the situation now in the United States soybean market? What is your biggest concern?
Well, since the announcement of projected tariffs by China in April, we've seen the situation be that there's been virtually no new orders for U.S. soybean exports for the balance of this marketing year, as well as pre-orders for next marketing year. And since July 6, we've seen a further erosion in prices for U.S. soybean farmers. Since April, we've seen prices for U.S. soybeans drop by about 20%, and that certainly is significant for U.S. soybean farmers. I've talked with many, and they say that if they had to market their soybeans at current market prices, it could be anywhere between a $100,000 to $250,000 reduction in their annual operating profits.
So at the end of April, Bloomberg reported that China was apparently no longer buying U.S. soybeans amid the rise in trade tensions. It further reported that China canceled a net 63,000 metric tons of U.S. soybean purchases in the 2 weeks which ended in on April the 19th. How much is this affecting the international soybean market, and how badly hit have been American farmers?
Well, understand that at this time of the year, U.S. soybean exports to China usually are very small, although we would have expected to see some shipments or some orders being placed. But right now it's the South American season, so it's hard to really know the actual total impact, but right now our sales are down about 21% from where they would have been 1 year ago. That certainly has us concerned. That being said, right now there's a worldwide short supply of soybeans because the Argentinians had a poor harvest. So we are thinking that there's a possibility that China will come back to the U.S. and have to buy some U.S. soybeans, probably maybe in August or September through December until the South American harvest comes, till we know what the South American harvest is going to be like.
So, Professor Gong, China is the largest single importer of soy in the world. How much damage will tariffs do to China's own agriculture, namely animal feeding, animal husbandry, raising, and to the Chinese consumers who are also consuming heavily on soy products?
Well, I mean, the damage will be mostly on dampening demand. But in terms of the agricultural sector itself, it actually stimulates more supply, more planting of soybean in our northern eastern part of the country. Now, keep in mind that soybean is used mostly for two purposes. One is for edible oil. That's through a solvent extraction process. And second is use the remnants for animal feeds. Now, the edible oil part is actually quite substitutable product. I mean, there are alternative oils on the market. For example, the canola oil, the rapeseed oil, and also the sunflower seed oil mostly can be imported from Ukraine, from Kazakhstan, from Turkey, China's western neighbors. And my understanding is that on the China's consumer market, the consumer's preference for different oils is actually quite substitutable among a couple of varieties. So I think in that aspect, there's really a danger that demand for soybean is going to be permanently affected by people's shift in preferences if they're used to not staying with soybean oil. So I think that's a real long-term danger here. And I think the U.S. side really should think twice about the long-term impact of this. This is a very serious situation. Mm-hmm. And I know, for example, the solvent extraction plants actually can also accommodate alternative materials. For example, rapeseed oil, canola seeds, and rape seeds. I mean, they can be used for extraction of soybean, refinement of soybean oil as well.
Mr. Burke, statistics from U.S. Agriculture Department show that since March, America's soy exports to countries other than China grew 50% year-on-year. What accounts for that surge? Does it mean traders in other economies are buying American soybeans to sell to China or somewhere else?
Well, no, I don't think that at this stage there are global traders that are buying soybeans to sell to China. The reason for the surge is just that U.S. soybeans compared to Brazilian soybeans are priced much lower, and that's because Chinese buyers are bidding up the price of Brazilian soybeans. And so importers in other markets are seeing that U.S. soybeans are priced very attractively, and they're taking advantage of this opportunity to buy. It's a good time for them to place orders because U.S. prices are significantly lower compared to Brazilian prices, and that's just because of the Chinese demand for South American soybeans.
So, Mr. Burke, still with you. What have the soybean farmers been doing to recover the situation on both sides of the Pacific, if any? Have you seen any results?
Well, first of all, U.S. soybean farmers have been taking advantage of their opportunities to manage risk. So most of the farmers that I have talked to, when prices were in the $10 range, locked in prices for their current crop in order to be able to deliver at a price that they could still break even. And many farmers have, when the prices were at $10, forward contracted their new crop production that will be coming in September and October. But they haven't, most farmers are unwilling to forward contract more than 50% of their crop because they just don't know if they're going to have bad weather, what their harvest will be like. So they're taking advantage of everything that they can to manage the risk on their side. But also, as you have noted, the U.S. soybean industry has used all communication channels, face-to-face, social media, traditional media, to communicate to both the U.S. government and the Chinese government that we are not in favor of using tariffs as a way to remedy trade disputes, and that our point of view, as you pointed out, is that neither the U.S. farmers nor Chinese consumers or Chinese animal producers will benefit from the escalation and utilization of tariffs.
Mm-hmm. But how do you suggest, Mr. Burke, that the situation be resolved, be solved? Do you see any solution anytime soon?
Well, I think that the only way the situation can be resolved is through continued dialogue between the two governments. At this stage, it's a government-to-government issue. I believe that the Chinese soy processing industry that the doctor referred to, the companies that make soybean meal and soybean oil, would prefer to be able to have access to U.S. soybeans as well as South American soybeans on a timely basis. And U.S. soybean farmers want to have continued access to the Chinese market. So at this stage, again, the U.S. soybean farmers have made it very clear that they are in favor of continued dialogue to resolve issues and not the utilization of tariffs.
Okay, Professor Gong, does China, I would imagine that Chinese government wouldn't want to see Chinese consumers or Chinese agriculture being hurt as a result, but does China have another option other than retaliation as a response to U.S.'s tariff actions?
Well, I mean, the soybean oil is actually really a very competitive oil. I mean, it's a very good oil, you know, compared to other types of oil that the Chinese society have traditionally consumed. And it's also quite cheap, and it's very cost effective. So I think especially the soybean stuff coming from North America. So I think this is a really very good product. It shows the competitive advantage that the United States enjoys tremendously in its agricultural sector. So I think it's a win-win situation for both sides. But unfortunately, because of this trade war, the United States government imposed $34 billion worth of products subject to a tariff, and Chinese government has to take an action to retaliate. And they don't have many options here. I mean, we only have about 130-some billion dollars of imports from the U.S., and soybean holds a very large percentage. So, naturally, this is something the Chinese government has to do. So I think, as the gentleman said, that the only way out of this is to, through negotiation, come back to the negotiating table and especially avoid this kind of escalation in rhetorics and substance in both.
And at this moment, the ball is in which court, Professor John?
There's a statement from Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, today from the G20 meeting saying that the ball is in our court. But our Ministry of Foreign Affairs came back and said, no, the ball is in your court. I think this is a matter somewhere in between. I think that the fact is that what the U.S. wants is a very long boundary list of structural changes with respect to Chinese government's practices and regulations.
You cannot expect overnight changes.
Right. These things,
right.
You cannot. I mean, right now, I got the impression that China is offered a take it or leave it offer. This is something just unacceptable. What we can do is to start from that list and negotiate from there. This is something that we can do, but right now it's unacceptable, I think.
We have to leave it there. Many thanks to my two guests, Mr. Paul Burke, Regional Director of North Asia for US's Soybean Export Council, and here in the Beijing studio, Professor John Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. We'll take a short break now, but when we come back, I'll be trying to find out what it is that US President Donald Trump apparently understands that the rest of us are maybe too dumb to grasp. Stay with us. Apart from the ongoing trade war with China, the U.S. has also been declaring wars against imports with its regional allies in what analysts have called geopolitical suicide. The EU and other trading partners have threatened to retaliate against American tariffs on steel and aluminum and have voiced similar sentiments about previously announced import tariffs on washing machines as well as solar panels earlier this year. So what's behind the U.S.'s multi-front trade fights? Has the U.S. gone rogue? For more, I'm joined by Professor Ian Reifowitz from New York's SUNY Empire State College and author of Obama's America. And here in the Beijing studio, Professor Jishe, Director for Strategic Studies at the Institute of American Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Professor Reifowitz, to you first, delivering a sharp rebuke for Donald Trump. The International Monetary Fund said recently that the current threats made by the U.S. and its trading partners risked lowering global growth by as much as half a percentage point by 2020, or about $430 billion in lost GDP worldwide. How bad is that in the overall scheme of things, and how big a threat is it to the world economy?
Well, I would say it's a reasonably significant threat. I mean, if global growth typically comes in, let's say, around 3 to 4% per year in a good year, to lose 0.5%, you're talking about a pretty significant reduction. It's not the difference between growth and a worldwide recession, but it's not insignificant either. And the real question is, what are the cascading effects of it? You have that kind of reduction in growth in one year, but if the trade war goes on, do those reductions sort of feed on themselves as people, institutions, banks pull back from investments? We did see certainly in 1929, 1930, tariffs that went up both from the United States and Europe and around the world that absolutely fed into the Great Depression of the 1930s, which was the worst economy that the modern world has seen. It fed into two world wars, World War II, and an absolute disaster, for the entire globe. Do I see that happening again? I hope not. I don't think so. But look, at some point, this trade war has to come to an end. Whether it takes 0.5% of growth down across the world, or 1% or 1.5% over 1 or 2 or 3 years, I really don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, well, American news website Vox has said that now the world's worst fears about Trump presidency are starting to come true, that America under Trump is committing what Georgetown University professor Dan Nexon calls geopolitical suicide. Now the U.S. has launched trade wars not only with China, but also with its allies. Professor Fan, what are the calculations behind this administration's apparent kamikaze moves?
Well, President Trump has been confronting all countries worldwide, including his allies, partners, and including potential competitors like China. And why he's doing that? And he does not care about cooperation, collaboration with allies and partners. It's only because, his slogan had been American first. He cares only America. He cares only whether people could buy America and hire America. So that's only his focal point. He has been trying very hard to achieve that goal. That's why he's doing that since he entered into the White House.
Do you agree with the assessment, Professor Reifowitz, that this U.S. administration is going rogue in the world? Professor Reifowitz.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought, I'm sorry about that. Do I think that he's going rogue? Yes. I mean, I think to some degree, yes. Look, the President of the United States always has to protect American interests. And you can say that Donald Trump is doing that. So the real question is, does he hurt American interests by the way he is pursuing them, A, and B, in taking shots at the multilateral system that has served both the U.S. and the rest of the world so well in the post-World War II era? Is he making the world, is he hurting the stability throughout the world as well as in the U.S.? And I think the answer for both of those is, at least to this point, it does look like it, yes. The real question is why. Donald Trump's whole reputation is based on him being a great deal maker, right? He had this famous book called The Art of the Deal, which cemented to some degree his reputation in the United States. Well, he's trying to make deals around the world now, and the question is he going to succeed? If he had an argument with China over trade practices, things like intellectual property, property theft, intellectual property transfers, it might have made more sense to approach those directly with China in a and separate that from the issue of tariffs. It also might have made sense to go to the EU, go to Japan, and say, we're all having these problems with China. Why don't we negotiate together with China as one? Instead, he's attempted to engage in trade wars with everybody, from the European Union to Canada to Mexico to China and Japan, all at the same time. That's what doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't seem like he's very good at deal-making, even though that's supposed to be his reputation.
But Professor Fan, what can explain the forces pushing him to pursue these probably legitimate goals, but using such outrageous approaches?
Well, you know, he truly believes he's a real deal maker, but he's playing the game of zero-sum game. He only wants to gain. He does not want to, give it back. It sounds like, the United States is the only superpower. It has a capacity and a capability to bully others. So at this moment, Trump, the United States and Trump is such a bully, and he wants to hurt all other people, and he wants to gain. He does not want to give it back to others. Mm-hmm. It sounds like very much like the jungle rule, but now it's a civilized world. Now people could gain by cooperation rather than by confrontation, but he's doing that in a way of a confrontation rather than cooperation and collaboration.
But surprisingly, we're also seeing kind of a certain level of support to this administration, whether they're supporting his goals or his means. I mean, the public are very divided, of course, with many people strongly opposing his views and with also many people on the other side. Professor Reifowitz, does this behavior, does this mentality have its market domestically? Have the general public been feeding it, or has it been the other way around?
I think that President Trump is driving that trend, and I'll tell you why. He was the nominee of the Republican Party. He is a Republican. The Republican Party, before he came along, was had a significant commitment to free trade and opposition to tariffs. And Donald Trump won the nomination. Donald Trump has made his position clear, and polling shows that the Republican voters have moved from their previous position to the Trump position, and Republican elected officials, at least to some degree, have been supportive, although some have spoken out against it. But the point is that the larger public opinion among Republicans really has shifted. So it's more about supporting Trump than it is any kind of particular belief in free trade and opposition to tariffs. Look, having said that, there was a situation when Trump took office that China was using some practices that I think many Americans found unfair. China was a developing country. China is now a wealthy country, and to some degree I think China was playing under some of the old rules. The question was not whether China needed to change, but whether it would have been more productive for those changes to come through negotiation rather than by starting a trade war, which Trump thinks, and says, is easy to win. Clearly that's not the case. Republican voters, Republican, in particular states, are going to be hurt by this trade war, and the question is, will they stick with him in the long run?
But on the other
so far, Republican voters are.
Yeah, but on the other hand, he might argue that, look, some of the things that I managed to do are possible, have been possible, simply because of the way that I did it. For instance, the meeting with Kim Jong-un about the DPRK nuclear issue. Had I not exercised maximum pressure, there probably would never have been this window of opportunity. Professor Fan, what do you say to that?
Well, he boasted that he can do something unconventionally. Actually, he's an unconventional president, but we need to wait to see whether he can deliver. He has, made many promises, and he boasted that he can achieve a lot. But at times we will tell whether he can achieve that.
Right. Let's come back to the American domestic governance. Some have openly said that Trump's power should be limited, and yet, by and large, this administration has been able to go ahead with almost whatever he wanted to do. Professor Reifowitz, how come the checks and balances that should be in place are not apparently working?
Well, the checks and balances are institutional, and right now, the Congress, which would be the main check on the president, is controlled by his party. And for better or worse, most of the people in his party have decided it's more important to go with him and back him rather than act as some kind of check. They see that as something that the other party, the Democrats, are supposed to do. And one of the reasons for that is that we have a political system right now where if you're a Republican, especially in the House of Representatives, maybe less so in the Senate, but in the House of Representatives, you have more to fear from being challenged by somebody who's more conservative than you are, who's somebody who's more pro-Trump than you are, than you do from somebody who'd come along from the other side. We will see if that changes in November. November, the midterm elections are incredibly important. If Trump's party, the Republicans, are able to do well, then that's vindication for him.
Okay. Now, there's this article by Brookings researcher Robert Kagan, which recently commented that the U.S. is now becoming a rogue superpower, active, powerful, and entirely out for itself. And I quote, in recent months on trade, Iran, NATO defense spending, and the DPRK, Trump has shown himself as a president willing to throw off the moral, ideological, and strategic constraints that limited U.S. action in the past and can bend this intractable world to his will, at least for a while. Professor Fan, do you see it in that way as well?
Yeah, I agree with him. I think the United States and President Trump is kind of, strategic retrenchment. It looks like he's moving very forward, very offensive, but in many people's views, that's one way to retreat. He wants to, the United States do not want to give, do not want to provide public goods, do not want to, play the leading role. He only cares about itself. It's becoming very selfish, very coercive, very confrontational. For those people like Robert Kagan, they think that it will hurt the United States in the long run. President Trump may be able to gain in short term, but in the long run, it will hurt American status as a superpower. It will hurt American, had been, very strong in the value, in ideological, moral high ground. But now nobody will care about that. So in the long run, it will hurt the United States.
Okay, we're going to leave it there and let's see how things play out. Many thanks to my two guests, Professor Ian Reifowitz from New York at the SUNY Empire State College, and here in Beijing, Professor Fan Jishe, Director for Strategic Studies at the Institute of American Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. And that's it for this edition of The Point with me, Li Xin. As always, follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.